Morning, Ian. How are you? All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to CNET58, week 10. Let me start the recording. All right, so welcome to week 10. This week, we're going to basically rebuild our domain environment that we did in week 5. But this time, we're going to do it on our Hyper-V machines. We're going to also be introduced to the differencing disks that we'll use to really help us speed up our deployment of servers. And I'm going to do today's lecture / lab is going to be a little bit joined and kind of work together. So we're going to do some of the lecture, then we'll stop and we'll jump into do some of the lab stuff. And the reason I'm going to do that is for time management. Because we will need to sysprep our Win server parent and our Win 10 parent machines. So I'll have a slide, or I'll stop and we'll do that and do it together, because that's going to take some time, especially with the Windows 10 machine, because we'll have to do that reset within the settings to reset Windows 10. Then when it restarts, then we can do the sysprep, because there's some sort of problem with sysprep and a Windows 10 machine after it starts to download updates. So we have to do the reset to get that ready to go. All right, so I'm going to share my PowerPoint. And again, this is the CNET58 week 10 PPTX file from the modules on week 10 on Canvas. Also, you'll notice on there is a video that I made. This is a video that I made last year when we did this this lab on when this class was moved to an online environment. So it has all the details of this week's lab. And it's just kind of a getting started. It doesn't walk you through the entire video, but it should be enough to get you rolling. So if you get stuck, or if you have to leave the lecture in the lab and do this later, feel free to view that. And I wanted to mention, I know many of you have had, things come up during Tuesdays where, originally we were scheduled to meet from 8 until 3, basically. And I know sometimes, you have a doctor's appointment, you have some sort of scheduling thing. It's hard to block out 16 weeks straight of Tuesdays. So I understand that. I'm very empathetic to that. So if you haven't noticed, and some of you have done this already, you have until the end of the week to actually submit the lab assignment. So if you want to start it today or get going on it now, and then something comes up and you have to, jump off of the lab time, I'm basically saying you have from Tuesdays until Sunday at 11:59 p.m. to submit the lab. The only caveat to that is, if you need help, I'm only available to help you over email the other time, but I'm here to help you in person during the lab time. So if you decide to do it on your own, you're going to have to kind of walk through it on your own. But I think the videos and then the demonstrations and things like that will be more than enough to get you going. All right. So just keep that in mind as we do the last 5 weeks of this course starting today. All right. So let me share my screen. Find it. All right. So again, this is the PowerPoint that is on the Zoom. So let me let this load up. It's loading all the slides. There's about 100 some slides. So all right, so this morning we're going to take a look at a more detailed look at Active Directory. Now, we've interacted with Active Directory 2 main times, right? In week 5, we installed a domain and installed Active Directory. We created some user accounts. We modified the default group policy. And then again in the lab midterm, right? That was based on lab 5. So you ran into this again. So I want to just kind of walk through some of the features of Active Directory. So the role of a directory service, and we know that a network, its benefit, or really its purpose in computing, is to share resources. And those resources can be files, they can be printers, they can be authentication, they can be policies, they can be applications. It can be a whole wide range of things that can be shared across a network, internet connections, right? So the purpose of a directory service is where all that information is stored generally in a centrally located resource. And the primary reason for a directory service is so that we can manage it easier. All right. Now, Active Directory is the Windows version of a directory service. There are other directory services. Novell and SUSE Linux has a directory service that they use that's similar, but it has a couple different features than Windows Active Directory. Now, one of the things about Active Directory is if you just decide to unwrap it as you go, right? For example, we'll just turn it on and then we'll just add things and change things as we go. You're going to miss some of the key benefits to it, as opposed to if you had planned it properly. So remember back in week 3, we talked about the Microsoft Solution Framework and, excuse me, and how the framework is designed to help us plan an IT project. Those same steps or those same ideas really will help us when we look at planning and the setup of Active Directory. So early protocols that were utilized, and we know in networking, protocols are communication languages, basically, that allow different systems to communicate using the same language or the same protocol. And the first one that was introduced to work with these directory services was the Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. And it was based on an earlier protocol that was used in the Unix systems known as the X400, then the X500. And Windows incorporated LDAP in its early server systems before it completely switched to Active Directory in 2000. So if you drill into a server system, you may find remnants of the X500 protocol embedded into that system, because it's kind of a legacy that allows backwards compatibility with almost any other directory service. All right. Now, so integrating other operating systems like Linux and Unix requires using LDAP. So Windows uses Active Directory. Everybody else still uses a version of LDAP. So they have to be there to work together. All right. Now, what Active Directory offers is the following, and we'll look at these in more detail in the following slides. But first off, it gives us a hierarchical organization. Have any of you ever worked in a medium to large business where there is what they call an org chart, right? Where they show, here's the CEO, here's the vice president, here's the manager of this department, this department, this department. Underneath the manager are his assistants, and underneath the assistants are the frontline supervisors, and then level 1 employees, level 2, whatever, however you're organized, and depends on the business. Well, think of Active Directory as the org chart for your entire network. So it's going to contain the information about all the users, all the computers, all the resources, all the policies, and all the interrelationships between all those entities. Okay. Now, it's considered centralized because it's in Active Directory, but it's also considered distributed because, as we know from the midterm, right? One of the questions in there was, why should you have more than one domain server? And the answer is so that you can distribute and spread the load for Active Directory. So once we install the first domain controller, it does everything. And then when we add second and third and fourth, it distributes the functions of Active Directory, like the authentication using the Kerberos protocol. When you log on, you don't have to go to the original server. You can hit any of the servers that appear or respond to your request first. So it's kind of like a round robin load balancing. So whoever answers the question first is the one who you authenticate with. So that's where it's called centralized, because it's in Active Directory, but it's distributed because it's spread out across all your domain controllers. And it's scalable. You can get big with this very easily, right? You can add more domain controllers and add more features, and it will continue to grow. And there are companies, extremely large companies, like AT&T. Like a really good example in Southern California is the AAA, the Automobile Association. It's a huge corporation, and they run all of their servers on Windows servers using Active Directory. So they're spread out all over America, and they all their systems communicate using Active Directory. Another benefit or a feature of Active Directories is security. So it's designed with security in mind. So the user accounts, the authentication schemes, the policies, all of those things are secured. It also provides flexibility. And then one of probably the biggest benefits is it allows the administrator to set policies in one location and have it push. So it pushes out to the rest of the network, and it will enforce or enable or disable those policies. Okay, so those are the features that we're going to look at. Now, the physical structure of Active Directory is we have what are known as sites and servers that are configured as domain controllers. So if you go into a Windows Server server manager, right, that the program that pops up when we started, you'll see after we install Active Directory, there's a tool called Active Directory Sites and Servers, Active Directory Users and Computers, Active Directory Relationships, Active Directory Schema. There's all of these elements that are physically part of the server. And besides the physical structure, we also have what we call the logical structure. And this is where we can really model our domain to look like our org chart. So that makes it very, very easy for a network administrator and a server administrator to know what should our domain look like. Well, if our organization is already structured in a logical manner, where we know who reports to who, whose job description fits what role, we can use that to help us organize our logical structure of our Active Directory. Okay. So does that make sense so far? So far, so good? Okay, good. So with our Active Directory, the term site is just a physical location where we have domain controllers that communicate with each other and they will replicate their data. Now, a couple of slides ago, it said it's a centrally located but distributed database. So what that means is that in many of you have probably worked with a database or you're familiar with the term database, but a database is a system, it's an IT or a business application that contains information that is normally stored in tables, and the tables have columns and rows, just like Excel, right? Except, unlike Excel, the database, the rows and the columns, those entities where they intersect, they can be very, very different data types. Whereas Excel, normally it's all text, right? It's some sort of, writing. In a table, in a database, they can be different features. One can be a text, another one could be a picture, another one could be an executable, another one could be a policy or a script. So a table can contain all kinds of information. And Active Directory is really just a big database that contains all the information of our network, what's on our network. Okay, so each domain controller has a full copy of that database or of the objects that make up the domain. And the domain controller is responsible to keep a copy of that in case another domain controller loses theirs. Then it can all automatically, and almost like in a self-replicating, self-healing environment, if one domain controller, for whatever reason, it becomes corrupt, the database, it can heal or get the data from and re-replicate from the others. So it will automatically kind of keep everything replicated. Okay. Now, this replication is going to cause or introduce onto our network traffic, right? Network traffic. So just like when we're on our freeways here in Southern California, when we get on to a freeway, the thing we don't want to find is a lot of traffic. We want to have this replication occur when there isn't already a lot of data traffic. So the domain controllers will kind of monitor that and determine when is the best time to do that. Okay. The other thing we need to know about this replication is it will only replicate within, or only replicate certain data across the entire domain. The rest of it will only replicate locally. So for example, if we are, say, the Tesla Corporation, and we have offices here in the United States, we have offices in China, we have offices in Germany. And if we create a user, let's say we're at our, Walnut site for Tesla. If we're a Tesla dealer in Walnut, and we hire a new salesperson, that user account probably does not need to be replicated in China or Germany or even Texas or any other state other than Southern California, because that salesperson probably isn't going to go sell cars in China, or he probably isn't going to go sell, or he or she isn't going to go sell cars in Germany. So those local systems or objects do not need to replicate across the entire domain. So our domain is set up with that kind of principle in mind. Okay, so that's storing a copy of the data and replicating it across all of the domain controllers. Now, if in our Walnut store, we have 2 domain controllers, we want that user account to replicate, because if the user logs on, they need to authenticate to whichever domain account or domain controller they pick up when they first log on. So that information needs to be available. Okay. And the domain controller also provides data search and retrieval functions for users that are trying to find things. So if a user says, I need to print to a printer, now a printer may need to be accessible to an office that's not local, right? The user may need to print a report in Germany, right? It could be that, your general manager is in Germany right now, and he wants you to run a report and print the update because there was a big, change in inventory last night. He wants the updated, so when he presents, he has the latest and greatest report. You may want to be able to find a printer resource that's not local. Okay. And the other thing is, of course, it provides the authentication. And then once you're authenticated, remember our AAA, the authentication, the authorization, and the auditing. The authorization, once you're authenticated, tells you what do you have permissions to do. Now, we will build our user accounts, and we'll use our group structure. So just like we talked about earlier in this course, the group structure can be a huge benefit to us to leverage how we're going to apply what are known as our access control lists. So how do we apply permissions? The way we do that is with ACLs. How do we enforce our ACLs? That's with our groups. And then our users are in our groups. Okay. So far, so good. I know that I'm unwrapping a whole big thing before we really take a deeper look at it, but I need to define some of these terms first. All right. Now, the main organizational components or parts of Active Directory are at the 4 listed there: the OUs or organizational units, the domains, then the trees, and then the forests. So the smallest of these is the organizational unit, and an organizational unit would be like your division or your department. So let's say our organization is Tesla, and we have our sales team, we have our research and development team, we have our chemical engineering team for our battery work, we have our electrical engineering team, we have our computer engineering, right, the programmers, and then we have our IT team. Each one of those would probably be their own organization unit. Okay, so Louis just asked in the chat, would tech admins be in a specific OU? And the answer is yes, they would probably be in the IT organizational unit. So, and what you would do now, our sales OU would contain user accounts and objects that are related to the sales department. Those users would not need to be able to log in to the computer programming OU, or they wouldn't need to be able to access a printer in, you know, the HR department. But so the OUs will be our containers where we can kind of say, whatever's in this box, we need it to stay in that box with some exceptions, right? Some users like IT need to get in and out of all the different departments. So they'll be have different permissions to, you know, administer the whole thing. Okay, so OUs or departments are part of the company or part of the domain, and then the company is part of the organization, right? So like Tesla Walnut is part of Tesla America, which would be like, so our department sales is part of Tesla Walnut, which is the domain, which is part of Tesla America, which is the tree, and that's part of Tesla Worldwide, which is the forest. Okay, so they get bigger as we go out. Okay, now the main way that we organize things is, it's in its name, is the organizational unit or the OU. Okay, and that's where we keep things kind of in a smaller context, because it's easier to manage a smaller subset of users and computers and servers and policies, because the policy for our store in Walnut may differ to the policy to a store in China or to a research facility in Austin, Texas, right? So we couldn't just say we're going to set a policy at the top of our forest and everybody is going to comply with that, because that may not be true, right? And then we have to start making exceptions. So we want to apply the policy, especially our group policy, in the location where it is needed, not everywhere. Because if we just start applying rules and regulations at the top and they trickle all the way down, we're going to have to make a bunch of exceptions, or they're not going to work properly. Okay. Now, what's inside of the organizational unit? Well, there's user accounts. So when we create a user, we want to put it into the proper organizational unit. And those user accounts will also probably be in our groups. So inside of our OU, we'll have our users, we'll have our groups, and then every time we attach a computer to the domain, so when we go to Windows 10 today and we say join the CNET.lab domain, once it's authenticated, right? Because it asks you for the password. If you know the password, you have basically said, I'm moving this computer from a local computer account or computer system. I'm going to put it in to the domain organizational unit, right? And that will go into another folder in our OU called computer accounts. We'll also have our printers, our shared folders, our shared applications. Our servers for that particular domain will be in our OUs, as well as the domain controllers. Okay. So far, hopefully you're tracking with this. Now, the next step up, right? The smallest is the OU. That if we organize the OU on the org chart of a business, it's going to flow. It's going to make sense all the way through. If we did something crazy, let's say we just did an OU based on your last name. So if your last name is from A to J, you're in OU number 1. From K to N, you're in OU 2, and then O through Z, you're in the 3rd OU. If we just did it for some random reason by alphabetical order, that we're going to run into all kinds of issues, right? Like, Zelensky is in the 3rd OU, but he's a member of the IT team. And how do we apply that? Miller's in the 2nd OU. How does that work? Fernandez is in the 1st one, but he needs all, I mean, it wouldn't make any sense. Okay. Now the domain is really the core structural unit of Active Directory. And the domain is going to contain OUs and represent the administrative, the security, and the policy boundaries. So where do our users, where do they need to get information from? At what level? Well, typically they can get up to the domain, and then they have to be a special user account or a special group member with special permissions to go beyond the domain to the tree and the forest level. Okay, because we would not want a user to be able to browse file shares on our German file shares or on our Chinese, our file shares in China. That would be a huge security risk, right? To have somebody that could just poke around and root, and if they happen to find a folder without the proper permissions, who knows what they could get into, right? It could cause, major international scandal or embarrassment. So small to medium companies usually have one domain. Larger companies may have several domains to separate geographical regions or administrative responsibilities. Okay, so sometimes these domains are, businesses are constantly acquiring and merging or, selling to another company. So for example, a smaller company may sell out to a larger company and they'll merge those users and resources into the bigger domain. So we may be Tesla and we may buy the Ford dealership, right? They may merge into us and, have some sort of relationship that we would have subdomains. Okay. So that can happen as well. Now, the next step up from the domain is the tree. And a tree is a grouping of domains that share a common naming structure. So we may contain the domain name of Tesla.com, but we may have walnut.tesla.com, Syracuse.tesla.com. And then we may have the forest so those would all be trees. And then the forest would be Tesla.com, right? So if you think of a big pyramid, at the top is the forest, that covers everybody. Then the next one down is the tree. And then we have the domain. And then inside the domain, we have OUs, and it will cascade down. Okay. Now, a tree can consist of parent domains and possibly one or more child domains. So we may have our walnut.tesla.com tree that's part of USA.tesla.com. And then underneath walnut, we may have a subdomain, for say an acquisition we did of some other company. So we'll have that. And then the forest is a collection of one or more trees that provides a common Active Directory domain environment. So all domains and all trees can communicate and share information. And they can consist of a single tree with a single domain, or it can contain several trees, each with hierarchical of parent and child domains. So here's a good picture. This kind of makes it a little bit easier to understand. So this is a company called Nifty Tools and CoolGadgets.com. And there's the CoolGadgets.com that's part of the forest, and Nifty Tools as part of the forest. Those would be considered trees. And then underneath those would be our domains, where we have us.coolgadgets.com, Deutschland.coolgadgets.com, Asia.niftytools.com, and then Americas.niftytools.com. And then in each one of those domains, now each one of these is a domain, right? This is a domain, this is a domain, this is a domain. But the way it's structured, this is the domain level, this is the tree level, the whole thing is the forest level. Okay. So, and then inside of each one of these, we have OUs. So in Americas.niftytools.com, we probably have a sales OU. We probably have a IT OU. We have a, HR OU. And that would be based on our organizational chart. Okay. So the structure here is, you can see this can get worldwide, global in no time at all. And this would allow this information. So if let's say the CEO of the forest, right, wants to send a message, he could send a message to a group that would contain everybody in the forest, and everybody would get that email message. Okay. So it allows for that type of technical interconnectivity. All right. Now, so are there any comments on the structural and kind of the layout, both physical and logical, of the domain and the trees and the forest? Anybody have any comments? Yeah, buy a Tesla. That's a good idea, Louis. Buy two, and then just park one in my garage. All right, nothing else? All right, so how does this apply to us, right? We probably aren't going to, they're not going to hire you at Tesla in Walnut and say, hey, we need you to redesign our entire domain and our trees and our forests. And I mean, they've already done that work. But what we may need to do is install Active Directory. Okay. And we've done this a couple times now. This should be something that if you go to a job interview and they ask you, so what did you do in this CNET58 course I see on your resume? What did you do in your servers course? One of the things I hope you will say, because that's what they want to hear, that you have some Active Directory experience, right? I think I mentioned this story before, but I had a former student. He graduated from the CNET program with his Associate's of Science degree, and he applied at a school district for a technician job, a service technician, right? Which was working with desktops and help desk and printers and that kind of level of a job. And during the discussion, they looked at it, they asked for a copy of his transcripts, unofficial transcripts. And they said, I see you took a servers class. What did you do in that class? And he mentioned that, well, we installed domains, we set up user accounts, we set up policies, we used Active Directory, we created some relationships between different sites. And they ended up offering him the job above the job he was applying for. They said, we actually have two positions. The one you applied for is the service technician. We also have an administrator position for a server admin. And they said, what you just said, that's exactly what we're looking for. And they hired him at the higher position. So, you know, this is what employers want, people that know Active Directory. Okay. Now you're not going to be an expert with just, 16 weeks in this course, but you will have some familiarity. So, and that brings me back to the point that we've installed Active Directory twice now, and you'll do it again, again today. Now, if you don't already have DNS installed, it comes along for the ride, right? There's a little checkbox that says, do you want to install DNS? And it's already checked if it's your first domain. So if it's the forest and the tree and the domain and the OU, right? Which is what ours is. We have like this one little group, and inside of it, we have that's the forest, the whole group. Then we have the tree, the domain, and the OU all inside of it. Yeah, and especially Gerson, you mentioned it, to get hired by a school district, they're constantly looking for technicians in school districts. Even now, in fact, I need to follow up with my friends, my contacts over at the Pomona Unified School District, which I've lost track of how many of our students they've hired. It's in probably the 10 to 15 range over just the last probably 5 or 6 years. And they persist, they stay there for a long time. But if I hear something from a school district, I'll let you guys know. So anyway, after the role is installed, you have to configure Active Directory when you promote this server to a domain controller. Now, in the deployment configuration window, we are going to select this third one here, add a new forest, choose this if it is the first domain controller in the network. So that's exactly what we're going to do. And then you're prompted for the fully qualified domain name for the forest root. So that is something that we put in, and I tell you what to put in, and that's CNET.lab, right? That is the domain forest root of our environment. And then underneath that, we could have other domain or subdomains. We could have CNET58.cnet.lab, CNET50.cnet.lab, CNET52.cnet.lab, or however we wanted to do that all the way out. All right. And then we choose the forest and domain functional levels. And for us, we're always going to select the highest level. This slide shows Windows 2012 R2. Ours will have 2016. So it'll go up to the last version before the version we're on. Okay. And then, of course, domain name is already set up, as is global catalog. And then we put in the password. Okay. So the global catalog, that's the base system of the database of our domain information. So that's like the main component of the database is the global catalog. And the global catalog is the part that gets replicated across sites. So once we have our first one, always has the global catalog on it. If we were to install a second domain controller, we would have the option to uncheck that. And we may not want that one to synchronize or replicate the global catalog for whatever reason. Normally, you want the global catalogs distributed evenly across your domain. All right, and then you put in the password. All right. And this restore mode, this is in the event of an emergency. If something gets corrupted, you can actually boot a Windows machine, a client machine. If it's attached to the domain, one of the boot options is to go into the domain recovery mode, right? Some of you may have seen this on your machine. If you like on Windows 7, if you hit F8 during the startup, you would see the advanced startup features. In Windows 10, you have to restart the machine with either Shift Windows restart, and then it will go into the recovery mode, or you have to go into the settings and tell it to restart in recovery mode. And then you'll see this, if it's attached to a domain, you'll see this recovery mode for the, or the restore mode for the domain. And that's where you need to know this password. So we set it here, and then we'll use it if we need to recover it. Okay. Now, I only one time in my entire career did I ever have to recover our Active Directory domain, and it was after a power failure, and it was an extended power failure, and our battery backup, it caught the power failure, but one of the servers didn't turn off properly. It just did a cold shutdown. And when it started back up, my domain controllers, all of them, I logged into all of them, they all had this corrupt global catalog. And then it said, run the restore mode. So I logged on to one of the machines, restarted it, went into the startup options, the recovery modes, advanced features, and I selected domain recovery. I put in the password, and it sat there, and I did not see, it has a little progress bar at the bottom. I didn't see that move for almost 2 hours. So for 2 hours, I wasn't even sure if it was doing anything. But that was my only hope to get everything back up, other than doing a restore from backup, which would have been a big project. So I just left it alone. And, people would come by or call and say, hey, the network's still down. I say, yeah, we're doing a restore mode. And then finally, after 2 hours, it went from no progress to about 99% and finished in like 2 hours and 20 minutes. So it just took time, and then everything was fine. So whatever that did, it rebuilt the global catalog and then re-replicated it to all the domain controllers, and then everything was back up and running. Okay. So when we install Active Directory in the DNS option window, you must create the DNS delegation, which allows Windows to create the necessary records on the DNS server for the new domain. So this DNS and Active Directory are very tightly coupled. They work hand in hand. So the ability for your Active Directory to be functional relies on DNS, which is true of almost any internet or TCP IP based system. It has to have solid domain name services. Okay. Now, and then in the path, you specify where you want the database. Now, there is some debate as to whether or not these folders and these databases should be on the same volume as your operating system. There are some companies, I've read some company policy where they say those must be installed on a separate volume, which makes it easier to back up. But it adds complexity to the system and the permissions to replication. On our environments, we're just going to leave it in the default location, which is on the same volume as the operating system is. Okay. Then we review the system, then we click next. Now on this, you'll get that we passed all the prerequisites, but there's a couple warnings here. First, the Server 2012 R2 domain controllers have a default for the security settings named Allow Cryptography Algorithms Compatible with Windows NT 4.0 that prevents weaker cryptography algorithms when establishing a security channel. So when our systems replicate, if we use the domain functional level of Server 2012 R2, it's going to include a policy that says lower the cryptography standards to allow it to work with older Windows NT 4. Now, if we know that we don't have any Windows NT4 servers, which I doubt hardly anybody still has NT4. Don't say nobody, because there's always somebody, but most people, most enterprises have moved off of Windows NT. I mean, that was in 97, 98, 96 when Windows NT came out. So it's quite old. But you never know. But so it's going to, by default, have this policy. And if you don't have it, it won't. This will only go into effect if you have NT4. So if you don't have NT4 and you see this warning, you can safely ignore it because it's not going to do any harm to you. Okay, now if you do have NT4, this is giving you a warning that say, hey, the cryptography security is going to be lower than it should be. Okay, and that's to be compatible with the old systems. And then away we go. And then we click next and we get things going. All right. Now, Microsoft recommends that you have at least 2 domain controllers in every domain, and that's for fault tolerance and load balancing. And where does the load balancing come in? We don't set up load balancing. Well, this happens automatically with the replication. Okay, so if we have, server1.cnet.lab and server2.cnet.lab, and we install the Active Directory role on both of them, it will automatically. So if I log into server 1 and I go into Active Directory users and computers and I create a user account, in about 15 minutes, I can log on to server 2 Active Directory and I'll see that user account magically appears over there because it will replicate across the domain. Okay, so that's very important. We want that to occur. And it's a best practice to have at least 2 of them. Now in our labs, we're only going to do 1 because we're in such a small lab environment that we really don't see the benefit of having more than 1. At the end of this class, we will build what's known as a trust relationship between 2 separate forests. So we can have forest 1 and forest 2 share information back and forth with a trust relationship. So let's say Honda and Tesla, they merge into one company, but we don't want to lose their forest. We could just have a trust relationship between them. Okay. Now, installing additional domain controllers, the only thing we're going to do different is instead of saying add a new forest, we're going to say add a domain in an existing, add a domain controller to an existing domain. So that screen would be a little bit different. Okay. Now for us, we're just going to create a new forest. All right. Now, when a new domain controller is added, you need to know the answers to the following questions. Do you need to install DNS? Well, if it's a Windows server and it's a second domain controller, install DNS on that server because then that becomes redundant. So now we have load balancing not only for the global catalog and the domain replication, we also have load balancing with our domain or with our domain name services, DNS. Should it be a global catalog? And the answer to this typically is yes, unless you want to minimize the amount of traffic between those 2 servers. So this may be an instance where you have to consider the bandwidth of the network in between those 2 servers. So if I'm adding a new server in, say, my Phoenix store, and my main operations are here in Southern California, say, San Dimas or Laverne, and the link in between Phoenix and Laverne is, say, ISDN or a T1 or some low speed connectivity, I may not want to have the global catalog replicated every 15 minutes from here to Phoenix, right? From California, Arizona on a slow speed, because that's going to add a bunch of bandwidth. So I may need to consider, that in part of this. Okay, if I just say yes, yes, yes to everything, all of a sudden I start getting, help desk tickets. Why is the network so slow between when a user in Phoenix tries to access a report on our Laverne file share, right? Why is that taking so long? Why am I getting these timeout errors? Why is it so irresponsive? And then we go, oh, that's probably because I created a domain controller and so my domain's taking up all the bandwidth. Another question is, should it be a read-only domain controller? So read-only means it can only read data, it can't actually change it. So in our smaller sites, our satellite offices, they may not have the IT expertise that we don't want them, they may not be trained or certified or skilled in certain functions. We wouldn't want them to be poking around, someone logged on the server and, did something they shouldn't have done. If we're worried about that, we can make it a read-only domain controller. So it'll function, but it'll only work after we set it up. And then which site should the domain controller be located? So where makes the most sense? So just like like in networking, the CNET58 class, we talk about wide area networks, and you see the different links in between them. We would probably want to consider putting our domain controllers where we have the most robust bandwidth, the biggest connection. Okay. So, we wouldn't want to do it across a modem connection. That would be a bad idea. All right. And then we can talk about forests. So installing a new domain in an existing forest. So this is the option there. So there's two options, two variations. We can add a child domain, which means we're adding a domain that shares the top level and second level domain name. So tesla.com, we would have walnut.tesla.com. So that'd be a child domain. Or we can add a new tree, which would be a new name altogether. So like we have Cool Gadgets and then Nifty Tools, those are two separate trees inside of the forest of everybody. All right. So here's where the options are there. Now for us, we're just going to add a new forest, and it will be first domain, and then we give it the name there. And then here's the new domain. So this would be europe.csmtech.local. All right. Any questions on any of this domain stuff so far? No? All right, I'm going to stop my share. And then I'm going to stop the recording because we're going to. All right, so let's start up again. I want to share my screen, and I'll need you, let's take, I want to initiate the sysprep on our Windows machines right now. So let me share my screen, then we'll walk through this. But you'll need to log into Guacamole, and let me just pick so this is my server. Can you see my screen? Yeah, okay, good. Notice I changed my background. Hopefully you did that last week as well with the to a red. And if I go into my Hyper-V server manager, you can see I've set this up already where I've created these machines. So what I need to do is I'm going to log off of this one. And I'm going to go to another server that I have set up. And with this machine, notice that this is where you should be today, right? After last week, you should have created your WinServer parent, your Windows 10 parent, and your CentOS 8 parent, okay? And what I need you to do is the first thing I want you to do. So I'm gonna pick another machine here. Jordan, are you on? I'm gonna pick your server real quick, okay? So I don't know if you're logged in yet, but no, you're not. Okay. So this is Jordan's machine. So I'm gonna go into the Hyper-V manager. I'm gonna actually pin this to your taskbar, just so it's down here, nice and neat. That's the way I like it. I don't know if that's how you like it, but and what we're gonna do is we're going to sysprep the Windows server. So this one's easy to do. So I'm just going to start this, and I'm going to do the same thing with Windows 10. I'm going to start that one up. So I'm going to move these so I can see them, and we'll let this start up. And then I'll walk you through the sysprep. Now with the server, it's easy. You just open a PowerShell and type sysprep, and it'll take it from there. But I want you to make sure you do the out of the box, and then make sure you tell it to shut down. So on Windows Server, you have to hit the Control-Delete, which is here. You can also go Action, Control-Delete, and that will do it. And it tells you the key. If you want to do it on your machine, Control-Alt-End will also send the Control-Delete. So I like the little button here, the little 3-finger salute, Control-Delete. And then our password, CNET58. And while this is ready, I'm going to log on Windows 10 as well. All right, so these are just freshly installed. We didn't do anything other than install them last week. So what we need to do now is run sysprep. So I'm going to let Server Manager load, and then I'll close that. I don't want anything else running. So you want to do this on your machines. Now, Jordan, you can just sit back, kick back, and watch me do it, because I've already done it on my 2 machines. I don't have another one to do it on. So here, I'm going to just run PowerShell. So I'm right-clicking, PowerShell admin. You can do a command prompt too. It doesn't matter, I guess. And now if you do this on this machine, on your host machine, and you type and you look in this directory, you do not have an executable. So if you type sysprep on your host machine, you'll get an error that says command not found or something. You should get an error. Please give me an error. There it is. So you cannot sysprep the wrong machine. But on this one, if you go cd lost my focus. Oh. And I like using the tab completion. So I just type a little bit and then hit the tab key. And this one, now I have a sysprep.exe. So if I run sysprep tab completion and hit enter, I want to make sure it's the enter the out of the box experience, generalize, and then instead of reboot, make sure you hit shut down. Okay. And on Windows Server, it'll just go through and do that for you. So you can actually close this and we can monitor it here where it will show us what it's kind of doing. And once this is where it says off, then we can come back into that. But on Windows 10, if I go to the PowerShell, and the nice thing is on this one, it already puts you in the System32 directory. So I just have to go sysprep. And then if I do sysprep.exe here and hit enter, and I generalize shut down, this will probably give me an error. Yeah. So if you get this error, what we need to do, and this is what we had to do in the week 5 as well. I need to come into here and type, if I just type reset and then go to this reset this PC. And this is why I want to do this now, because this takes a little bit of time. So then do the get started, remove everything, and then next. Says this won't take long, but the next part does. And then reset, and let this run for however long it takes. And from this point, Jordan, I'm going to let you take over that one. But make sure when this is done resetting, you have to create the user and put the security questions, just like we did last week on the install part. And then as soon as you log on, run the sysprep and it will work. And make sure you hit generalize and power off or shut down. That way, when it's done, we'll see. So like you see server here, it already sysprepped and turned off. And that's, and we'll come back to this in lab. We'll pick up after the sysprep. Okay, so if you're looking at the lab document, which is available now if you want it, don't go past that part. We're going to go on that part together. Okay, so what we're going to do now is you just have to wait for this to reset. So I'm going to log off your machine, Jordan, and you can come back and pick it up from that part. All right, good. He said he got it. All right, so I'm going to stop this share and share my screen, my PowerPoint again. Is everybody okay with that so far? So you should be able to sysprep your Win server dash parent, make sure it shuts off and leave it like that. And then you probably won't be able to sysprep Windows 10 until you do the reset. So reset it as soon as it's done with the reset, and you'll just have to kind of watch that. Leave a window open with that running in the background, and you'll see when it's done. You have to put in the username and password, log on, and then immediately sysprep that machine too. And then that one will shut off when it's done, and that's where we'll pick up the lab. Okay, and that could take 45 minutes or so. Yeah, Frankie.
Oh, yeah, I was doing the sysprep, but I'm in the sysprep on PowerShell, but I'm not actually sysprepping right now.
Okay. Can you share your screen real quick?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh yeah, no, you don't type run. Type
Okay.
sysprep right there.
Shoot.
And then hit the tab key.
Oh, the tab. Okay.
Now run it. Yeah, in PowerShell,
Okay.
you have to run it. It's a little more specific. So leave that OOBE, click on that generalize, and then change that reboot to shut down. Then hit OK. Oh, that's Windows 10. Okay. So now close that.
Okay.
Not Windows. Yeah, just close PowerShell. Now click Start. Type reset. Reset this PC. Yeah, no, you were able to do it on server. You got server sysprepped.
I just do the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But you don't have to reset it.
Okay. And then.
Okay, then get started. Remove everything. Then next. And then reset. Then just keep an eye on this one. When it's done, then go back into sysprep and you'll be able to do that. So yeah, start
Okay.
your server. Yeah, it's
And then I
helpful for
just.
other people to see this process.
Okay.
All right, so log on. All right, so there's another way we can get to sysprep. So right click on start. Luis, or sysprep right now, do run. And then type sysprep. Hit enter. Now open the folder that it's in. Now just double click sysprep. Then generalize, shut down, hit OK. And that one will just start going. So you can actually close the VM, hit the X up on the, yeah, up there. And it will run in the background. Okay, then now all you have to do is watch when this is done, then do sysprep there, and then your Windows server will shut down when it's done. Okay,
Got it. Yeah.
so you can drop your share. All right, good. Anybody else have any questions? So I want you during this next hour, hour and a half, I want you to sysprep your Windows server, make sure it's shut down afterwards, and then reset Windows 10, sysprep Windows 10, and have it shut down. And that's where we'll start lab. Otherwise, you'd be sitting there watching these do this for 25, 30 minutes. That will eat into our lab time. So I want to maximize our lab time a little bit. All right. If you have any questions, just shoot me a chat. So let me share this again. Okay. To where we were. All right. So another way that we can work with our systems is in PowerShell, right? And we're going to, next week is our lecture and lab where we'll do a bunch of stuff in PowerShell. So I'll show this stuff here, but we'll get a little better understanding of it next week. So here's some directions on PowerShell. And for some systems, the only way you can do it is to use PowerShell. Some of these functions only are available in PowerShell. And Microsoft is slowly but surely doing two things. They're moving to the cloud, right? Almost all their enterprise-based applications and servers are all cloud-based now, or partially cloud-based, some on-premise, most of it in the cloud. And the other thing they're doing is they're forcing their admins to learn PowerShell, because some things can only be done using PowerShell. All right. So here's the commands that we could say install the Active Directory domain services for us, dash domain name, give it the domain name, and it will automatically do that for us. And the main benefit to any of these command line tools is the ability to write scripts. So if we were creating domains, if we had to do it on 10 different machines, we could go on each machine and install feature, wait, click next, wait, click next, or we could just go to PowerShell, remote into that machine with PowerShell remote and run these commands and be done with it. So it's much more efficient from the area. Now, if we're installing it with media, we can use a feature called install from media, which is the IFM. And what you do is you take your install media and you copy it to a file share. And then instead of having to put the CD in every machine, you can just use IFM and point it to that file share, and it will treat it as if it's actually a CD or an ISO image and go from there. So in a way you go on that. Okay, so here's the NTDS util, which allows you to run the IFM command. And then you can do IFM, and then it'll tell you where everything's going and how it's getting created. So this will create the file share and the location. Then you just run the commands and away you go. Okay, so install the news EC and select the IFM option. If using Server Manager, click the Install from Media checkbox in the Additional Options window, and away it goes. Okay, now besides, so far we've only used the Active Directory users and computers. There's also the Active Directory Administrative Console and other tools that are there. Now, we use the Administrative Center to create and manage users group and computer accounts, OUs, and connect to different domain controllers in the same or different domain. We will normally use Active Directory users and computers, which looks like this. Okay, so by default, this is a clean install. You will have in this top layer here, this 410 server 2012.local, that is the domain level. And then the OU, or these are built-in containers. And then if we create an organizational unit, it will, you'll be able to tell it's an OU because it will have the organizational unit, one of these tabs will appear on there. Okay. Now, by default, there is no OU because Windows doesn't know how your company is organized. And remember, the OUs, the organizational units, are based or should be based in a best case scenario on your company's organizational chart or the way your employees are organized. All right. So within all of this, everything under our domain, this is known as the schema. So it gives us a default user location, and these are all the installed by default users and groups. So there are certain groups that a domain needs to have. So it will for sure create an administrator account and a guest account, but notice the guest account is disabled. And then you have your other areas here that is created automatically. All right. Now, an object is a grouping of information that describes the network resource. The schema defines the type, organization, and structure of the data stored in the Active Directory database. There are schema classes that define the types of objects that can be stored in Active Directory. And then the attributes determine what type of information is stored within each object. All right. Now, the information stored in each attribute is called the attribute value. All right. So that's the kind of a definition of what is in the schema. So here we have the classes of the schema, the computer account, the domain controller, the group, the user, the OU, and the domain object. And certain things will refer to the computer account and others will refer to the user account. So if you recall, when we have had to modify the group policy or the policy, either for the landman workstation that we did last week, that was an attribute of the user account. And then when we need to update the Active Directory complex passwords, that was in the computer account, right? So when we see our policies, they're broken into two main objects types, either for the computer or for the user. So the computer means whenever that computer logs on to the domain, these policies will be applied. The user means whenever that user logs on, these policies or these attributes will follow that user. So if you have a user that logs on from different workstations, you probably want his policies to follow him or her based on their user account. If, on the other hand, you want software installed whenever the computer logs on, you probably want to assign that to the actual computer account, right? Now, these are the classes and then the attributes. So the attributes of the computer would be its name, its DNS name, a description. The attributes for the user account would be the logon name, the first, last name, password, maybe their phone number, their office, their extension, whatever that would be. That way we can keep track of that information. All right. Now, the container is the object that contains other objects. So it's like a box that contains other boxes, and or a folder that contains other folders, right? The nested folder helps us organize and manage our resources. And it can also give us the boundaries for where we want certain policies and security settings to take effect. Now, the three main container objects in Active Directory are the organizational units, which is the main one, the folder objects, and then the domain objects. All right. Now, the OU is the primary container used for organizing and managing resources. OUs can organize multiple objects into logical administrative groups that can be configured with specific policies relevant to that group. And you can delegate authority of an organizational unit. So we may have, say, a junior server admin, and we don't want to give him all the domain accounts, but we may say, you're in charge of the sales OU for now. And that way, if anything happens, it's only going to occur in that particular organizational unit. And then as they get more experience and a little more familiar with the way we do things, then you may want to, give them more authority. But the first thing we would probably do is just delegate authority to a specific OU. Now, if we put OUs inside of OUs, that can be used to mimic the corporate structure for easy object management. So like, for example, we may have an IT OU, and then underneath that, we may want to say we have desktop technicians and server technicians and security technicians. And we may want to put those in separate OUs so that we can really see who's in what group, right? We all work in the IT department, but not all of us are working with the desktop. Some of us are working with security. Some of us are working with, applications or some help desk or wherever we're at, right? So it's just another way of organizing. And that's why they're called organizational units, is because they help us organize. All right. Now, folders, there are 5 default folders, right? And we saw this here with the built-in the computers, the domain controllers, the foreign security principles, and then the users. So the built-in, this is, it houses the default groups created by Windows. The computers are all the default computers when they attach to a domain. Okay, so as soon as we add a new computer to the domain, it will automatically, without us doing anything different, it'll put it in the computer's account. Now, if we need to move it to an OU, we can just right click move and then select the OU and it will move it there. And that way, that computer will get the policies from the organizational unit. The foreign security principles contain user accounts from other domains added as members of the local domains groups. Managed service accounts are created for certain services. So we may have backup, we may have, our SQL database, and those, when we install those services, they'll create those managed service accounts. And then our users, which by default only has 2 default users that are created on a clean install. That's the administrator account and the guest account. Okay. And then there's several groups that are created by default as well. All right. Now, the core logical structure in Active Directory contains both the OU and the folder, and then whatever is included in those known as leaf objects. Larger companies may use multiple domains to separate administration, define policy boundaries, and security boundaries. Now, each domain object has a default group policy object linked to it that can affect all the objects in the domain. So when we modify, and I don't have a picture of that, but when we modify the group policy, that is going to, if we do it for the entire domain, that's going to go down to everything underneath the domain. So all the OUs, all the user accounts, all the computer accounts, whatever policy is set, that's going to affect everybody. And as you probably have learned from your experience working in IT or working with computer equipment, is there isn't a one size fits all for everybody, right? We may have a policy that says lock the ability to install applications on a user's computer, right? So we don't want everybody in our company to just be able to go on the internet, find a program, install it, and who knows what comes with it, right? Could be viruses, could be, backdoors, could be rootkits, could be Trojan horse, who knows what's in there. So we would say disable, do not allow anybody, and there's a group policy that we can say disallow installing software. Well, all of a sudden you say that's a good idea for everybody. And then all of a sudden your folks in your IT department, the executives, the research and development, the people that need to be able to do stuff like that, all of a sudden they're blocked. So that's not a good fit. So what we may need to do is create an OU or look at our organizational unit structure and apply that policy to the people that are in, for sure, like say we're at Mount Sac, our library computers should be set where nobody can install anything without IT's permissions, right? You have to be an administrator to install anything. So we would set those policies for the library computers, and that would affect only them, not everybody. So you want to make sure that you look at where is this going to occur? Because if you block everybody, that may not be, you may create more work than you're solving by eliminating the ability to install software, right? So we cut off our nose to spite our face, kind of thing. It's not a good deal, right? So leaf objects doesn't contain other objects and usually represent one of the following: either a security count, a network resource, or a group policy. Now, security count objects include user groups, networks, or computers. Network resource objects include servers, domain controllers, file shares, and printers. All right. Now, the user account is where we create our users. And again, there's two built-in accounts, the domain or the administrator and the guest. And every user that we create will automatically be put into the domain user account. And if on our domain controller, we also can create local user accounts. And these accounts are used for authentication, right? You are who you say you are. So it confirms the user's identity. And then once it's authenticated, we can give it the authorization with the, what permissions, what rights do you have? Groups are used to kind of corral a collection of users that have common permissions or rights, because it's much easier to assign a permission to a group than it is to individually assign it to 10,000 users, right? If those 10,000 users need internet access, we can create a group called internet access, put all the users in there, which is easy, control click all of them, boom, they're added into the group. And then we can right click on the group and give him the permissions to allow internet access. If you're not in that group, you don't have internet access, right? It's that simple. So we don't have to really worry so much about drilling down. Okay, where is K Miller? Here he is. After 10,000 accounts, let me right click properties. What group? Okay, now let me add them to the internet access group. That would be a nightmare to manage in a large environment. So again, the group are there. We can assign permissions to groups, and we can give them rights, which specifies what type of actions a user can perform on a computer or network. And groups are used to assign permissions because it's way more efficient than doing it individually or separately. All right. Any questions on the information so far, specifically with the users in the groups? Now I'm going to define the groups that we create here in a second. All right, I don't see any questions, so I'm gonna keep going. And then the computer account is it's automatically created when Active Directory is installed on a server, and then the object's name must match the name of the computer that the account represents. Now we can go in and we can pre-stage our computer accounts. So we can say this computer account, say it's server 1, is going to be, even though we haven't built that server yet, if we build it in the Active Directory computer accounts, as soon as we create that machine and we change its name to server 1, it will automatically, we don't have to attach it to the domain. It will already be there. Now, I don't like to do that in this class, because if your DNS isn't working, or your IP address scheme isn't working, or your default gateway isn't set right, or any of those other troubleshooting scenarios come into play, you can create the account and think it's in the domain, and it's not. So I like us to physically or manually attach it to the domain from the workstation to the domain controller, instead of from the domain controller to the workstation, which would be the pre-staged way, so that we can see and learn and develop the troubleshooting skills that we would need to ensure everything is functioning properly. So in this class, we will always go to the computer and attach the computer to the domain, as opposed to go to the domain, create the computer account, and then have it pre-staged. Okay. Other Leaf objects, we can have contact information, we have printer, and then shared folders that can be added to the system. So Alan asks, how does a group compare to an OU? And a group contains user accounts and other groups, And that's all it's used for. You can create groups for either distribution or for security, which means for permissions or for email addresses, whereas an organizational unit can contain anything. It can have other OUs, it can have user accounts, have computer accounts, and have group accounts. It can have all these leaf objects, and you can apply permission or policies, group policies to an OU that you cannot apply to a group. Okay, so group is really more limited than an OU. All right, good question though, thank you. Now, by default, Active Directory has a recycle bin that's not turned on, but you can turn it on. And in larger environments, especially if you're working with maybe some people that aren't as experienced in Active Directory, you could turn that on and then restore the whatever they deleted or moved from that. But once it's enabled, you can't disable it without reinstalling the domain controllers in a forest. So if you don't want it on, leave it off. If you want it on, you have to leave it on the rest of the time. There's no on-off switch where you can say, well, I don't want it now, but I want it later. And then I don't want it now, I want it later. I mean, it doesn't work that way. And the other thing is all of your servers, your domain controllers in the forest have to be 2008 R2 or newer. So if you have a 2008 that wasn't R2 or 2003 or 2000 or NT4, you can't use the recycle bin. Okay, and you can enable it in the task. Now, finding objects in the Active Directory, you can search for it. So in the search box, like when you type a name, if it doesn't find it, it'll give you this, the default will pop up the search, and then you can tell it where to look. Now you can speed things up. If you know it's a user account, just search by the object's security settings, and it will find it, only find the user accounts, not the printers or shares or OUs that might have a similar name. All right. Now, in smaller organizations, the main focus is on OUs. Large organizations might have several domains, multiple trees, and even a few forests. And then the first domain controller creates more than just a new domain. It creates a new tree and the first tree or the root of the new forest. So when we create CNET.lab, it's a domain, but it's also the first tree, and it's the first tree in the forest. So it's doing three things. All right. And then it may be necessary to add different trees and different forests and different sites and different domains and different OUs and all that down the road. Okay. Now, the replication, I kind of touched on this, so we'll, I'm going to skip over these. There's some partitions that are made. There are 5 directory partition types. The domain directory, that's where the data in the database for all the objects in the domain, including the user group, computers, OUs, and so forth, that's where that is stored. It's actually stored as a file on a particular partition. You have a schema directory partition that has all the information about how those objects and object attributes tie together. We have a partition for the global catalog, which holds the information about all the replication that it takes place. The application directory partition used by application and services to hold information that benefits from those applications. And then the configuration partition, which is the information that affects the entire forest. All right. Now, there are roles that are created by default. And if you only have one domain controller, all of these roles are assumed by the one controller, the one server. So the first one, the single domain controller will have what's known as an operations master. And the first domain controller gets that role. Now you can move these roles. You can transfer them to other systems or other domain controllers if you need to. Now, remember I mentioned, or one of the first slides we talked about today was you have to plan this, right? So if you just start clicking and adding and doing all this stuff without any forethought, you may have installed the operation master's role on a machine that you don't, may be underpowered. You may want that on a more centrally located, right, geographically or within your company's footprint of the buildings on the server that's located on the broadest internet connection or network connection. If you just install it on a remote machine, you start your domain there and then say, well, I'll just move things around, it's going to get complicated. So again, you want to have a plan, right? And that's where that Microsoft Solutions framework can really help you out with this, right? Now, there's 5 roles referred to as the FSMO, and that's the schema master, the infrastructure master, the domain naming master, the RID master, and then the PDC, which is the primary domain controller, emulator master. Now, when removing domain controllers from a forest, if you just remove them and they have these roles on them, those roles are not replicated. They're installed one time and that's where they stay. So if I have a server and I don't realize it's the naming master, and I just say, well, we don't use that server anymore, I turn it down, all of a sudden my domain naming isn't going to work properly because that role is no longer on my network. So you want to be, you got to have a plan. I mean, it's not just that simple to say, well, how many of you buy stuff on Amazon and you get it and Amazon's got a great return policy. So you're like, that really wasn't what I thought it was. You send it back and it's like no big deal, right? I mean, you can just drop it off. Or I bought a pair of slippers on Amazon the other day, about a year ago, and I went to return it. They said, you don't have to send it back. So, my wife has 2 pairs of slippers, one she doesn't like or she doesn't want, and they're her old ones. So sometimes, it's so easy, they don't even want it back. But when we set up our domain, we should know what's going on and be able to, we don't want to just, I didn't like that, I turned it off, and no big deal. It can be a big deal, right? Now, we can do this from PowerShell. We can see the roles. So we can see, the get-add domain command will show us the roles, and then we can see the forest-wide roles with the get-add forest. All right. Now, another function and another feature that we're going to explore, this is our week 15 lab, actually, is trust, the trust relationships. So in Active Directory, a trust relationship says, how do these different systems, these different domains, these different subdomains or child domains, how do they trust each other? Now, if there is no trust, there is no permissions, or there is no relationship, right? Like, you may trust your neighbor to, water your, potted plants on your porch when you're gone, but you may not trust him to give him the key to your house where he can come in and, root through all your drawers and your closets and look at, turn on your computer and get on. I mean, that's a different level of trust, right? Well, I trust you. You just come over once, twice a week and, make sure you spray a little water on this potted plant on my porch so it doesn't die while I'm gone for the next week. Yeah, that's a different level of trust. So the same thing here. Now, when there's no trust between domains, there's no access across domains. So if we merge with another company and we want to keep their systems the way they have them set up, and we want to keep our systems the way we have them set up, but we want some of their users to be able to access our systems and some of our users to access their systems. We need to build a trust relationship between them. Now, when we have different domains in the same forest, the trust relationships are automatically created, because the assumption is if they're in the same forest, they should trust each other. Now we can break that. We can go in and turn off trust, but by default, they're turned on. Okay. If they're separate forests, we have to manually or use a trust wizard to build the trust. Okay. Now, all domains in a forest are going to have these roles. So they're going to share some common characteristics. And among that is the replication between the domains, and then the trust between domains. Then they're going to share a global catalog. They're going to share the operations masters. They're going to know where all that stuff is. The forest-wide administrative accounts will work everywhere, and it will have a single schema. So if we have a shared forest, these are the things that come with it. Notice trusts are built automatically, just like we said earlier. All right, I'm going to stop right here. It's 10 o'clock. And how many of you are able to, I'm going to stop my share, and I'm on slide 51. How many of you are done sys prepping your Windows Server parent and your Windows 10 parent? Anybody done with Windows 10 yet? Did the reset complete and then you were able to sys prep it? Okay, Jordan's done. Working on the rest. Okay, Louis, just finished. Good. So check on your Windows. Win Server parent should be done. And then once you start the sys prep for Windows 10, if you click shut down, make sure it's set to shut down. Make sure it's on shutdown. Don't do the reboot or you have to go through the whole thing again. And then when that's done, when we start our lab, and we'll start lab probably right around 11 o'clock, we'll pick up from that point in the lab. All right. So let's take another 10-minute break. Let's come back at 10:10, and then we'll keep going with the lecture material. And then just keep one eye on your sys prep. Make sure those are going and you're done with that. All right. So I'm going to pause this, stop the recording. The better it will be for everybody. Okay. So a single domain structure is going to be easier and less expensive than a multi-domain structure, but it may not always be the best solution. So again, it's not a one size fits all scenario. You have to really kind of modify and evolve into what is going on there. All right. Now, using more than one domain makes sense or is necessary if you have different account policies, different naming policies. Replication, you want to control where it's replicated because of the speed of the connection, or you may have internal versus external domains, right? You may have some trust relationships that maybe you want to be able to access their inventory. Say it's a shipping company that you constantly sending shipping material from. You may want to see their schedules, but they may not need to know your schedules, right? Because do they really need to know if you schedule another shipping with another company? No, they probably don't, right? You're going to use them for what you need them for, but they don't, it's not reciprocal, the relationship. It's kind of a one-way trust. So you may want to work that in, and you can tighten up your security if you have multiple domains, right? It makes it easier to kind of say at this border, right? At the edge of this company, this is where, they no longer have access to anything outside of that. Whereas if you're all in the same forest, we know that the trust relationships are built automatically, and you may have to go in and harden or, secure that. Okay. Now, group policies. Group policies is really the ability of a centrally managed system, right? For us, it's the directory services that allow us to push policies to the users. So we can apply it to the domain or to the OU or to the forest or to the tree or wherever we want to save. From this point down, this is the policy that's in place. Now, by default, there are two group policies that are created, group policy object, GPOs, the default domain policy, and then the default domain controllers policy. So one goes to everybody in the domain, then one is just for the domain controllers. Now you can view, edit, create, manage all of that with the group policy management console, which we've been in. And there's two main nodes, the computer configuration, the user, and each node contains a policy folders and preferences. Now, some of these policies can be applied in both the computer configuration and the user configuration. But when you start doing them, it's going to make more sense to apply one to the computer and or where the computer interacts with the domain versus where the user interacts with the domain. Okay, so like you may have a time of day policy that says this user can only log on at this time. Well, you won't put that on their computer because the computer may need to access a backup system or be backed up, its data backed up. But if it's after that time, it's not going to work. So it wouldn't make sense to put that kind of time restriction on the computer, but we could put it on the user. So if K Miller logs in or tries to log in after 5 p.m. and he's only allowed to log in from 8 to 5, you know, that's going to prevent K Miller from doing anything he shouldn't be doing after hours. Okay, so it's a good way to do that. Now each node contains a policy folder and preferences folder. So when we go into the group policy, we can click on the default domain and it will show us the policy. If we right click edit, it will go into the group policy editor. And that's where we make changes. So like this is where we changed the ability to use our non-complex password, right? The CNET 2021 exclamation point doesn't meet the complexity of the password policy, the default domain policy on a domain controller. Now on a standard computer, it's more than complex, but on our domain policy, it's not, right? So the three folders under the policies, there's software settings, Windows settings, and then the administrative template. The software settings allow us to install and manage applications remotely. The Windows settings are for name resolution, scripts, extensions, security settings, quality of service, and so forth. And then the administrative templates contains the control panel, network, printer system, and Windows components folders. So there are things we can do in for both the users and the computers. So we can assign software to in a computer. We can assign scripts and security settings, folder redirections, and quality of service within group policy. And then the administrative temples allow us to enable administrators to control the user's computer and network environments. So if we want to set everybody's background to a specific image of, say, the corporate logo or something like that. So, you know, sometimes people will change their background image and, you know, one person may say you're an avid fisherman, and I'll pick something really non-controversial. Say you like fishing. And so you set your background to a picture of you holding up this nice, you know, bass you caught at Pudding Stone last weekend. Well, there may be somebody in your company that thinks it's morally wrong to kill and eat fish. You know, maybe they're a real animal lover and they're against any kind of killing of any of nature's creatures, and they might be offended by the fact that you have a picture of a fish you caught, you know, and use your imagination to go even more offensive, right? It could be, you know, anything, right? People can be offended by. So your company may say, you know, in order to prevent that from being a problem, we don't want to have people feel um, uncomfortable or threatened or, you know, um, put upon, you know, if they see something on somebody's background, something as innocuous as their background. So you may say, okay, let's just go into the, the default administrative template and set everybody's background to the image of mountsac.edu's webpage, you know, Mountie Joe or whatever you want to do, you know, could be, you know, the Tesla symbol on Tesla's computers. That way, the users, they don't have the option, you know, you take away some of their freedoms, you know, to change their background image, but you're looking out for everybody where you don't want, you know, anybody to feel uncomfortable if they walk by your computer and see something on your background. You know, as silly as that sounds, there are all kinds of silly things going on in businesses today and in the world. I mean, you guys see that all the time, I'm sure. So from an IT standpoint, we can, you know, help prevent that by standardizing the look and feel of, you know, people's work environment. So this is how we could do that. So instead of sending, you know, a technician to go to everybody's workstation and change their background to this image, and then as soon as you leave, they change it back, we can just say, you know what, one, you can't change it, and two, I'm going to set it for you. And that way, you know, end of discussion, everybody's taken care of. I mean, it's a little strong-handed, you know, kind of heavy-handed, strong-armed, but, you know, if the administration says that's what we need to do, that's how we can do it. All right. So group policy can be done that way. Now we can apply group policy in 4 places: to the local computer, to a site, to a domain, or to an organizational unit. So Alan, you had asked earlier about the difference between a group and a OU, and this is one of those, is that policies can only be applied to an OU and the domain, site, and local computer. Now, they're applied in the above order. Now, if policies are not defined in the higher level, the last policy that it reads will take precedence. If they're contradictory, so if at the local computer, the policy says that you can change your background, but the OU says you can't, the OU will take precedent. Okay, so if it's not defined or if it's contradictory, the last one takes over. All right, so that's a quick look at Active Directory. Now I want to briefly look at organizational units and Active Directory accounts, because this is where we're going to spend a little bit of time. Today's lab, you'll have to know how to do this, and pretty much every lab that we go forward, when we create user accounts, you have to know how to do it. So the benefit to the OU, which we've already talked about, is it allows you great flexibility with regards to policy and security. So following the org chart makes sense, because I mean, when you hire on, and let's say you're the executive assistant to, you know, whomever, the vice president of sales, your job description, you know, what are your functions? What do you do? What are your roles? Are probably going to be spelled out in your job description. You know, this person will, you know, update and maintain the vice president's schedule. This person will update and maintain documents related to sales reports. This person will make sure that reports are run on a timely manner. Well, if from an IT perspective, that job description just told you that whoever's in this role needs to be able to, one, see their calendar, right? See the vice president's calendar. Two, see the file share and have read write permissions, not just read, or, they need to be able to create and read, write, execute all of those permissions on the files and folders. They need to be able to run the reports. So, a typical user may be able to view the reports, but not create them. This user needs to. So based on that job description, and none of it has to do with IT, right? But all of it applies to how we're going to set up their permissions, how we're going to set up their role. So within that, the org chart and good job descriptions, and this is where in small companies, these lines get so blurry because, they may hire one of you to, in a small company, to run their servers, but they also need you to, can you do the website stuff? Or can you assist with the website? Can you also set up printers? Can you, you're good with databases. Can you run these reports on a, monthly basis for the finance department? Can you download and install these modules for financial aid? All of a sudden your job description, when they hired you, it was pretty cut and dry. But over time in a small company, you just pitch in wherever you're needed. And before you know it, you got all kinds of things going on. So how do you apply permissions to that? Unfortunately, the solution sometimes is just give them all the permissions. And that's a huge security problem. So in larger corporations, it's pretty defined. In smaller corporations, it gets blurry. So just be aware of that as you go along as well. Okay. So here's a single level OU on the left. We have fakebusiness.com, and we have, the administration OU, the marketing OU, the research and development, and then the operations. And then a multi-level OU, we may have the administration, may have marketing, but under marketing, we have both sales and advertising. And then R&D, we have research, and then we have engineering, and then operations. So depending on the size of the company, the organization, and the detail, your OU levels or structure may kind of modify. Now, the thing with OUs is they are somewhat pliable in that you can move them around. You can, move objects from one OU to another, and the policy it won't follow. It'll assume it will inherit from the parent OU, and it will take it from there. So there's ways you can kind of modify this if necessary. Now, we can delegate control. So a person with higher privileges can assign or delegate permissions to somebody with a lower security privilege. Commonly, we would delegate tasks such as creating, deleting, and managing user accounts, resetting passwords, getting their user information, create, delete, manage groups, modify group permissions, policies, and then generate result and set up policy for planning and for logging. So we may need to delegate some of that. If you're the only one in your company that can reset a password because I don't trust anybody else to do that kind of stuff, you're going to get so overwhelmed with requests that you're going to have to come to the conclusion that I need to delegate this. I cannot do some of this high level planning and high level, design work and, testing and researching these future technology things if I'm constantly answering the phone saying, hey, I forgot my password. Can you reset it? 150 times a day. That's going to get really, really old, right? You want to delegate that kind of stuff if you can, right? Some tasks can be created for delegation as well, but you have to understand the nature of the permissions and how the permissions are inherited. by default, the properties don't show that another user has been delegated control. So once you delegate it, it doesn't like show up on a report that says, here are the permissions you've delegated it from. To verify who has been delegated, you have to look at the permissions and go in and drill into them, and it'll show you what's been delegated, right? Object permissions, the 3 security principles that can be assigned permissions are the users, the groups, and the computer. Now, the security settings are composed of 3 components. These are referred to as the object security descriptor. And you've probably seen some of these terms in like the Security Plus material. We have the discretionary access control list. The object owner has certain permissions. Well, they have all permissions actually. And then the system access control list. Now, discretionary access control list means it's up to the discretion of whoever has permissions on that object. So, typically our peer-to-peer networks are always discretionary access control. So we decide who can do what at our own discretion. Whereas a role-based or rule-based access control list is based on the administrator, right? And the mandatory access control list, like with the military and government entities, are based on classifications of both the user and the data, and they have to match. So if you have a security clearance and it's rated a top secret, you can't see it with the general security. Only top secret and above can see top secret and above classified material. So those are known as access control lists. And the system access control list is unique to Windows in that Windows, when it creates certain things, it gives the system permission to do things so that it can actually change things, right? And the owner, so if you log on as CNET58 and you create a file or a printer, if you install a printer, that user is the owner object, the object owner. So as the owner, you have full permission. You have all permissions. Now we can change the owner or move the owner. So we can change it from one user to another if we need to. And we can do that through the right-clicking on the folder. Normally permissions are applied to a folder and then it inherits everything underneath it. Although we can do it on the actual file as well. All right. Now, each object has a list of standard permissions. The standard permissions can either allow or deny. So we can allow read, write, create, delete, or full control, or we can deny it. Now, if we allow it and deny it, the deny always will override the allow. So the deny permission by default will have precedence. So if you allow it and deny it, you basically denied it. Okay. So the inheritance is how from the above will come down and be inherited by the one underneath it. So it's automatically transmitted, just like, you didn't have any choice in picking out the DNA from your parents, unless you were, kind of a test tube baby, where they said, I want this kid to have, brown hair and brown eyes and, have this genetic, nobody gets to choose that. It's just kind of, you get half from your mom and half from your dad, and that's the way it goes. The children of our permissions, they get it from the object above them, the parent object. Okay, now all objects in Active Directory are child objects of the domain. So the domain permissions will automatically be inherited by the children. Now we can break that. We can break inheritance with our permissions. But by default, that's how it's scheduled or designed to work. Okay. Now, default settings in Active Directory users and computers will hide some folders, an advanced feature, but they can be turned on. There's a lost and found. So if something gets deleted and it doesn't, it'll sit there in the recycle bin. If a, a, a file or a system gets changed and it gets changed to something that doesn't exist, it will go in the lost and found. There's program data system. There's the NT domain services quotas. And then if we have devices that have the trusted platform module chip in it, we can use that for, location services and allow certain security features to work with TPM. All right. Now, the property dialog box of domain folders in OU objects will have 3 new tabs: the objects, the security, and the attribute editor. So if you right click on an object in OU, it will in select properties, you'll see these tabs where you can change various things. And the effective permissions are a combination of the allowed and denied assigned to a security principal. They can come from assignments that are above it that will be inherited, or they can be explicit where we override the inherited and say this, I set this explicitly on this, that will do that. Now, this can create some exceptions to the rule that the deny permissions override allow permissions. So if it's deny in the inherited, so if the parent object is deny and you come down and you allow, if you break inheritance, then it will be allowed. That deny is not implicit. It will be explicitly decided by the allow on the child object if you break the inherited. So you can override the inherited permission. All right. But generally, the deny is always overruled. It always overrules allow. All right. Now, the most common settings for permission inheritance is this object only, which means it doesn't inherit from the parent. This object in all descendants, that means everything's going to be inherited. All descendant objects, this permission setting doesn't apply to the select object, but will be inherited by all the child objects. And then the descendant object type objects, permission is inherited only by specific child object types. So you could say only user accounts will inherit this, or only computer accounts, or only groups will inherit certain things. Okay. So as you can tell, we said scalability and flexibility are a big part of a directory structure. This is where all of that comes into play, is with the permissions that we can set. Okay. Now, some permissions are added by default on the discretionary access control when it's created. So to view that, you can go into the advanced security settings and view what the DACL put on there. Now, inheritance is enabled by default on child objects, but you can turn it off, right? There's a little checkbox that you can say, do not inherit from parent. But you should be careful with that, because you can mess up how Active Directory works. By one little tweak can have a huge impact, down the road. So generally speaking, unless you have reason to go in and tinker with this kind of stuff, just leave it alone, right? Set it and forget it, and you'll be, let Windows do what Windows does, which in this case is manage the directories, Active Directory, and it'll probably be fine with that. Okay, user accounts. User accounts have 2 main functions. Once they're used for authentication, and then they can also be used to provide detailed information about a user. So instead of users having to constantly call HR and say, hey, can you give me the extension to, you know, Juan in the finance department? People are going to get sick of, well, you should know that. Put it in their user account information. So when they create an email to Juan, they can look at their information. It will tell them Juan's extension, 1234. So they don't have to, make the information accessible to the users, and it will eliminate, the users bugging you about, hey, how do I do this? Where is that? How do I, if you make it common and accessible, they'll find that stuff on their own. Okay. Now, Windows machines, not part of a domain. So before you attach a machine to a domain, they're going to store their information not in the Active Directory database, but in the Securities Account Manager database, which is located on the local computer. Now, in 3 or 4 weeks, I'm not exactly sure which week it is, we're going to actually we're going to do a security lab, and we will use some tools, and there's a tool in Kali Linux called John the Ripper, like Jack the Ripper, but this is Brother John. John the Ripper, that will look at, and it will decrypt the SAM account on a local machine if it's using NTLM security protocols 4 or less. John the Ripper, the newer ones, like on Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 10, they changed it. Microsoft changed the NTLM protocol, so it's not easily hacked. But the older ones were, like Windows XP was notoriously unsecure. So we'll look at this SAM, and it's located in Windows. I mean, going to see Windows System 32, and that file is there. So if someone can get to that folder, they can do whatever they want there. Now, user accounts created in Active Directory are known as domain user accounts. And these accounts can usually log on to any computer that's in the domain, unless you have an account policy or a computer policy that says only these accounts are allowed, right? We may have a system in, say, our finance office where we only want our finance employees to be able to log on. Anybody else that just happens to walk by and say, well, I want to check my email, let me log on and jump on the internet, they're not going to be able to do that, or they shouldn't be able to do that, because there's certain things that may be confidential, or we need to secure on that computer. All right. Now, here's some guidelines for the built-in administrator account. It has full access to everything. So if you have an administrator account and it has a weak password, you have a weak domain, right? Because the administrator can do everything. Now, in the lab final and then, or lab midterm, and then today's lab, I'm going to have you actually delete the administrator account and copy it to the CNET account. And the easiest way to do that is just go into the users, right click on administrator, copy, give it the name CNET, hit OK. It will give you an exact copy of the administrator account. Then just go right click on administrator, disable. And that's like a 5-second fix. And the reason you want to do that is because everybody knows that the default administrator account on a Windows server is called administrator. It's spelled administrator, ADMINSISTRATOR, right? So if they know the username, they're halfway, or probably way less than halfway, but they have a percentage of an attack vector. If they know what the name is, they can, then they can start applying, these techniques to attack the password. So if we change it to even something as obvious as CNET, but how many people that have never heard of the CNET program, if they bump into our server, you know, they see it somewhere and they decide, oh, let me try to hack that server, and they do administrator, that account's disabled. They're not going to be able to do anything with it. But they would have to know that it's the administrator account CNET, or the administrator account is called, you know, Felix the Cat, or whatever we rename our admin account. It doesn't have to be a complicated name. It just needs to be something other than administrator, because if it's called administrator, they already know that. So that should be disabled, but don't delete it. Never delete an administrator account. Just disable it. Let it sit in your users disabled, but don't delete it, because there may be something that needs that account to work. I've seen software that will only be installed with the domain administrator account. They set it up. Whoever wrote the programming, you know, wrote the code for their program, they set it so it has to be installed by administrator. If you say, well, I'm going to use CNET in the administrator password, it will fail. It'll say error, not the administrator account. So some systems are set that way, but which is unfortunate, but you may have to go back in and create or re-enable the administrator account, install something, then disable it again, and then go from there. Okay, so don't delete it. And that's true of any account. If you have users that, you know, transition, you know, they move to another company, or they quit, or they get fired, or they retire, or whatever it is, disable their account, put it in a folder called disabled accounts, or no longer active, or something that's descriptive, but don't delete them, because if you delete them and then they say, I've had this happen where, okay, Joni doesn't work here anymore, delete. And then 6 weeks later, Joni's boss says, hey, I need to look at all the files that Joni created on the file share. And if I create a new Joni account, the SID, the security identifier, is different. So those files will not be accessible by Joni anymore. Now I can go in and change the owner and do all that stuff, but that's a lot of work. I mean, just leave that account disabled, just re-enable it, change the password so that we can get in and out of it, and then we'll be able to read everything that we need. All right. Some other information here with user accounts. The guest account is disabled and has to be enabled before it can be used. The guest account, the settings on the guest account say it can have a blank password. If you're going to use the guest account, again, rename it, because everybody knows it's called the guest account. And it should have limited access to a computer or domain, but does have access to any resources, which has the everyone group with permission. Now, when we create file shares, normally we want to delete the everyone permission and only, so we don't want to imply that everyone can read it, right? Unless we really want that to be true, go in when you set the permissions on the share, delete everyone has read, just remove it, and then explicitly say, this is who has permission, right? We don't want to get, you know, accidentally find out someone was able to read something they shouldn't have been able to read, you know, for security reasons, or for, you know, HR reasons, or whatever it is. So you want to err on the side of caution, right? Be more restrictive, and then you can add permissions later. All right. Now, when creating a user account in a domain, keep the following in name. The user accounts have to be unique. So you can't have a John for John Smith, and a John for John Jones, and another John for, you know, John Gonzalez. I mean, you can't use the same name for everybody. So they have to be unique, and they're not case sensitive. So you can say capital J-O-H-N and lowercase j-O-H-N. That's the same name in Windows. Now in Linux, it'd be separate, but And they should be, can be from 1 to 20 characters. They can use letters, numbers, and special characters with some exceptions. And you should have a naming convention, right? So most places will use the first letter of your first name and then your last name, and then append a number on it if you're the second one. So like at Mount Sac, I'm the 30th K Miller that's come through there. Some of you I know how you're, L Gonzalez 934, right? There's a lot of people that have come before you. And some of you, you're the only one ever, so you're unique to Mount Sac, which is kind of interesting because there's so many students that have come to Mount Sac over the years. It's kind of historical. All right, now by default, complex passwords are required, and passwords are case sensitive. And by default, only a logon name is required to create a username. You don't have to put a first and last name. Like we don't do that when we create our CNET user. I mean, what's CNET's first name? C, and then last name Net. I don't know. We don't need that. But if you're going to use this for information, right, where people can look up their extension and all that, fill that stuff in, or have somebody else fill it in. Delegate it to somebody that can do that. Okay. When you use Active Directory user in computers, you must enter the full name, the logon name, the user logon name, which is pre-Windows 2000, the password and confirm password. There's 4 checkboxes. User must change password at next logon. You need to be careful with that one, because if they access their account through the website or through a web interface, and this set to change password, they will not be able to ever access that account, because the only way you can change the password is if you're on the domain. So if they log on to a local machine that's attached to the domain, then they'll be prompted to change their password. If they do it over the internet, like say through Gmail or Amazon Web Services or anything like that, they'll never be able to access to change their password. We'd also set it that they can't change their password, or that the password never expires, or the account is disabled. All right. So here's what this looks like. By default, this user must change password is ticked. It's checked. So we want to make sure that we uncheck that. And I in our labs, I think I always ask you to uncheck that and check the password never expires. Now, does anybody know how many days by default a password is active before it has to be changed in Windows? Has anybody ever looked that up? Okay. Nobody? It's 42 days. So I don't know how Microsoft came up with that. Maybe, there's so many work days in a year, and if you do it 4 times a year, it's every 42 days. I don't know how they did that. It'd be more than that, probably 42. 365 divided by 42 is what? 9, a little over 9. So a little under 9. So I don't know, but yeah, if you click that password never expires, they'll never have to change their password. They won't be prompted to change their password. They can still change it unless you say they can't change it right there as well. Right? Now, reasons you might want to disable account is if they left the company, the account is not ready to use yet, or they go on extended leave. And you can do that from PowerShell as well. User templates, you can build a template and then copy the account information. So if you have a bunch of users in one OU that are similar, all you have to do is change the name and the account and then password. The template, just right click, copy, change the name, boom, done. Next one, right click, copy, and away you go. Or you can script it from PowerShell. Here's some of the things you can do to modify. You can do the control click or the shift click. Control click will select them individually. Shift will go from the top to wherever you shift click the next one. Everything in between will be selected. And then you can right click and you can add them to a group, disable, enable, send email, see their properties, whatever you need to do. Okay, so when you're working with large users, large number of users, that's a handy way to do it. Okay, here's some more with the password reset from PowerShell, renaming in PowerShell, moving an account. You can right click, click on move, or you can just drag and drop it, or you can right click the user account, click cut, and then paste it, and that will move it as well. So like all things Windows, there's more than one way to do it. You can also do it in PowerShell. The general tab is where the information is, log on hours, log on to. All of this is built in to this. So in today's lab, you can poke around with the user information and you'll be able to see all this stuff that I'm talking about here. Okay, the profile, this is where you can tell it what logon script to use. You can map network drives to use that automatically. So if you wanted everybody, say in a certain group to, or OU to get that, you'd go into their properties under the profile tab and tell them to connect and put in the share name, and it would go from there. All right. List groups, member of tells them what groups they belong to, and can also be used to add new groups or join a group or become a member of another group. All right. Contacts and distribution groups. This is like their personal information. That's part of their managing them. Again, groups are easier to manage than individual accounts because there's going to be less groups, or one group will, encompass hundreds or thousands or 10,000 users, which will be a lot easier to manage that way. When a group is created, you have to know two things: the type and the scope. So the group types, there's either a security group or a distribution group. Distribution groups are used for email, specifically with Microsoft Exchange. And a distribution group can have the following objects: user accounts, contacts, other distribution groups, security groups, and computers. Whereas the security groups are the main object that we use for our groups. And they can contain the same types of objects as distribution, which is just about everything. Now, if a contact is part of a security group that is assigned permission to a resource, the contact does not make use of the permissions because a contact doesn't have a security principal. So you really can't assign permissions to a contact. Now, you can assign distribution, so that you can send email to a contact, but the security group doesn't work that way. All right. You can convert group types. Group types can be changed from security to distribution. However, if a security group is converted to a distribution group, it will still have the discretionary access control, but it doesn't do anything. So you can get confused if it was a security group and you convert it to a distribution group, and then you look at the permissions, they'll look right, but they won't work because it's not a security group. So just be careful when you're doing with that. It's not common. Normally you'll have that done beforehand. And a distribution group may be converted to a security group, but a security group probably never going to be converted to a distribution group. All right, here's some scope. Now I'm going to leave some of this for you because we're running out of time here. But these tabs here, or these screens here, show us the domain local, the global, the universal, and then the local groups as well. Now here's a good acronym or abbreviation to remember: the AGDLP. So in a single domain, or when users from only one domain are assigned access to the resource, use AGDLP. So use the accounts are made members of a group. So their accounts are made members of global groups, which are made members of domain local groups, which are assigned permissions. So accounts are put into a global group is put into a domain local group, and then your permissions are assigned to a domain local group. So just remember AGDLP. And you can come with a mnemonic for that if you want. All guys don't download I won't say the last one. No. All right. So in a multi-domain environment where users from different domains, you have to look at it a little bit different. Accounts are still made up of global groups, which when necessary are nested in other global groups, which are made members of universal groups, which are then made members of domain local groups, which are assigned permissions. So the accounts still go in the global groups, and the domain local is where we assign our permissions, but our global groups may be nested inside of other global groups, and those global groups may be part of universal groups. So when we have two different domains, we'll have universal groups that can access everything. So we may have to modify that. All right, this describes global groups, and then universal groups, local groups, and local groups are only on the local computer. So for us, all of our, outside of when we install our systems, we're going to use domain global groups, not or domain accounts, not local. So very rarely will we install anything at the local level. All right, so I'm going to leave the rest of this for you to read over. There's just some, join in domain, which we've done that. An offline domain join, we're not going to do that, but you can pre-stage it. Disabling counts, the Active Directory objects with the from the command line, you can do some of this with the dsadd, dsget, modify, piping output. So a lot of this PowerShell and the so forth. All right. So that's it for today's lecture information. And I'm just gonna roll right into the lab. So if you need to take a break, feel free, right? Remember, you do have, I mean, if something comes up and you need to move on to something else to go take care of something, I'm perfectly fine with you taking until Sunday night to submit the lab. I know a lot of you will do the lab now and then you'll maybe answer the questions later and then submit later. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that. Even though we're a synchronous class where we're from 8 to 2:40, I understand, stuff comes up, so no biggie there. But let me go back, and I want to share my screen with my information here, and I want to open today's lab. Now, again, this week 10 lab start is a video I made last year that walks you through the sysprep process and how to get those differencing disks created. So let's talk about that. Let me open today's lab. And we've already done, now take a look at the topology here. So here's our Active Directory server. And unlike previously, where we had Active Directory and DHCP on the same server, now we're going to build a separate server. So in a larger environment, this is how we would normally see it. We would have our domain controller and leave it for that. And then we'll do DHCP on a separate machine. Okay, so we're going to build one side of our network. Now, this router is actually a Windows server. A routing remote access server. This will be another Windows server. And then we're going to have LAN A, which is for our server, Active Directory, DHCP, and Windows 10 1 client. And then on the other side of the router, we have LAN B, which I show these as switches because you'll create an internal switch in Hyper-V. And I'll show you how to do that in just a second. Okay. And then we're going to have another client machine on the other side of the network. Now, by default, you notice we only have one DHCP server. So our machine over here will be on a separate network. Then LAN A is one network, LAN B is a separate network. And then the router is used to interconnect them, right? That's what a router does. we only have one DHCP, so we're going to have two scopes, one for LAN A and one for LAN B. So our DHCP is going to get a little more complicated today. Okay, so this is a server, Win server machine. This is a Win server machine. This is a Win server machine. This is a Windows 10 machine, Windows 10 machine. Okay, so I say note that the router is actually a server. To build all these machines, we're going to use differencing disks that use the parent-child relationship. Okay, so hopefully you know how to log on to Apache Guacamole by now and get connected. If you need anything from the file share, here's the information. You don't need anything if you copied it last week. And a differencing disk is a special disk type used by Hyper-V that contains the files that are different between the parent and the child. So when we sysprep Win server parent, that hard drive in Win server parent is going to become the parent differencing disk for Active Directory, DHCP, and RRAS today. Okay, so before we can do that, we have to sysprep it. So I have the instructions here. We've already done this. If you've sysprepped that, do not go down any farther than number 8. Okay, so now when this is finished, close the Win server parent virtual machine. So I am going to come onto my machine here. And let me get my password. And I'll do my Authy. Oh, got a good number, 747. Okay, so now let me go back to, I was on L1. So if I come into Hyper-V and let me go to my other one actually. R4. All right. So on this machine, you'll notice that I have these machines that are, these have been sysprep. Now we're not going to sysprep CentOS. It doesn't have a sysprep routine, and we don't need it because it's not going to join a domain. But on Win server parent, if I come in here and if I go into the properties or the settings, and if I look at this hard drive, you'll notice that this hard drive is in the C users public. So if I come in here and hit browse, that will get me where I want to be for step number 9. Okay, so close the Win server parent virtual machine, which means it's not running. Open the publics documents folder on the host machine and find the winparent.vhd file. So that's right here. This is the Win server parent.vhd. And I want you to change its properties. So right click on it, properties, and change it to read only, because we don't want that parent to ever change. So everything we create now will start with where Win server parent is, and then the difference. So whatever we change on the child will go on that differencing disk, but the parent disk is going to stay read only. Okay. And if you sysprepped Windows 10, do the same thing to this one. So read only. Okay. So that's all you got to do for that. You can also go into your C users documents. So C users public documents, Hyper-V, hard disks, and there's those files there. So you can do the same thing here. It should already be read only. Perfect. And then this one should be read only. Read only, perfect. See how it's changed? That's all we need to do for this step down to step 11, okay? This will prevent it. Next, go into the Hyper-V Management Console. So now we're gonna come into Hyper-V Management Console and right-click on the server name and select New Hard Disk. So if you come over here, right-click New Hard Disk, and we're going to create a new VHDX. It's going to be a differencing disk. We're going to give it the name of Active Directory. And we'll click Next, leave it in the default location. And then it says specify the parent. So if we go browse, our parent will be the Win10 server or the Win server parent. Okay, so we're going to click that and then we'll click Next. We'll click Finish. And then we're going to do the same thing. New hard disk, next, differencing. And this is going to be DHCP. Next, parent. Notice Active Directory is in here already because we created it, but we want to make a child from the parent. All right, we're going to do this again. Hard disk, VHDX, differencing disk, and this will be our router. What's blank where? In what step? Ian, I don't follow it.
Sorry, my mic was muted. The virtual hard disks, this is no items match your search in that.
Okay, let me do it again and I'll walk through this.
I think I might have clicked on the wrong thing.
Okay, yeah, just click cancel and start over and then finish. Okay, so now notice none of those are showing up here, but they are in our system. Now let's right click on server, new hard disk, next VHDX, next differencing disk. If you don't do differencing disk, you won't get the right screen. And then next, and then this one, we're going to call it Win10-1. Next, browse. This will be our Windows 10 parent. So all those disks on our topology, we need to build those. New hard disk, next, VHDX, next, differencing, next. Give it a name, Win10-2. Next, parent, Win10 parent. Next, finish. All right, so I just created 5 hard drives for 5 machines. So now what I need to do is repeat this for RIS and DHCP and Windows 10 and Windows 10.1 and 10.2. Okay. Then the next thing I want you to do is create the internal networks. So to do this, right click on your Hyper-V server, select Virtual Network Manager, and create new virtual network switch, select internal, and give it the name of LAN A and LAN B. So again, right click, Hyper-V Switch Manager. We want to click on internal, create virtual switch, give it the name of LAN-A. Do it again, Hyper-V. And you can also get over here with the virtual switch manager. There's more than one way to get to this stuff. New internal, create, and this will be LAN-B. And click OK. So now if we come into our virtual switch manager, we have our ability to create a new one. We have this one, which is an external switch. And then the LAN A and LAN B are internal. Yeah, this will be in this video. It will also, some of this is in that other video that I have here. Well, it's on week 10 module, the getting started video. All right. So now I have my network. Next thing I'm going to do is create Server 2019 Active Directory VM. So now we're going to create some VMs around all of these machines. And again, our topology here, if you get confused, always come back up here and look at this. Active Directory, DHCP, and Windows 10 are on LAN A. Win 10.2 is on LAN B. Okay, so keep that in mind. Okay, Luis, I hope everything turns out. And remember, you have till Sunday. These videos will be up there and you'll be able to look at. Okay, so now we're going to go to the virtual machine and call it Active Directory. So now go right click, new virtual machine. Next, Active Directory. Next, generation 1. We're always going to do generation 1 in this course. We'll give it 2 gigs of RAM, non-dynamic. We'll just do it full install. We're going to put it on LAN A. And then on this part, we are not going to create a virtual hard disk. We're going to use one we already created. So use an existing. If we do this, we have to reinstall server and start from scratch. We don't want to do that. So use an existing, browse, voila, Active Directory disk. Perfect. Finish. And that baby's created. Now we have Active Directory. Let's do that again. Virtual machine. Next, DHCP. Next, generation 2. We'll give it 2 gigs of RAM. You can give it more RAM if you want. Just make sure you don't go over 32 total. This is on LAN A. Next, use an existing. Browse. DHCP. Boom. Done. Now let's do our Windows 10 machines. New virtual machine. Next, Win 10-1. Let me put on my glass. I can't see that from here. Win 10-1. Next, generation 1. I'll give it 2 gigs. This is on LAN A, and we're going to use the Win 10.1 hard drive. Okay, Win 10.2. Let's do that one while we're here. -2. Next, Gen 1. Give it 2 gigs of RAM. Next, the Win 10.2 is on LAN B. Next, use an existing hard drive. 10-2, open. Next, finish. Okay, and then the next one, we're going to do something a little bit different here. Or we have to do something else to the router. New virtual machine. This is our router. It's a Gen 1. We'll give it 2 gigs of RAM. We're going to put one end of our router on LAN A. The hard drive is our RRAS hard drive. Then we're going to finish that. And then I think on this one, yes. So when the VM is created, add an additional network card and attach it to LAN B. So now that our router is created, we can go into the settings and add new hardware, network adapter, click on add, and attach that one to LAN B. Okay, so now this router, if we click on, so we're on RRAS, and notice in this Hyper-V manager, we have a window down here that says networking. That one should have 2 networks, LAN A and LAN B. Jordan says, do we create DHCP and RIS and other drives? Yeah, DHCP and RIS are based on the Win server parent hard drive. I don't understand the question here, Jordan. Can you unmute or something? No, okay, never mind. You got it. All right, so now everything is created. Okay, so now you're at the end of page 5. All right, so I've already done all of that. I've shown you how to do this. Now you have to, all you have to do now is start up Active Directory, set up the server to the IP address. So it's going to get a static IP address with a subnet mask of 192.168.1.3, 255.255.255.0. Give it the default gateway of 192.168.1.1, and then rename it to server. Okay. Then you're going to install Active Directory, and you're going to create the CNET.lab domain and go through all the steps here. And then you're going to, once that's done and it reboots, log on, create a new OU called employees, press the Windows key plus R, go into the group policy management control, and disable the complexity password like we've done before. Then do a GP update /force. Then copy the administrator account to a new account named CNET. And then disable the, well, you don't have to, but you could disable the administrator account if you want. And then go over to your DHCP VM, start it up. You're gonna have to put in the password just because it's like, it's been sysprepped. So you have to put the out of the box. You're gonna assign this IP address 192.168.1.2, 255.255.255.0, default gateway of 1.1. Set the DNS server to 1.3, rename the server to DHCP, join it to the CNET.lab domain. When it asks for a password, use CNET and the 2021 exclamation point password. Server will have to be restarted. When you log back in, be sure to log on as the CNET user and the CNET 2021 exclamation point password. So when you log on here, log on as CNET at CNET.lab, or make sure you're on the domain, which you can do other account, and it will say CNET.lab. And then you're going to, as the CNET user, make sure you add the DHCP server role, okay? And then you're going to go into the tools, you're going to expand the DHCP, right-click, authorize, right-click on IP version 4, create a new scope for LAN A, and then a new scope for LAN B. And then you're going to go into activate the scope. Then you're going to install RRAS. You're going to assign the network card that is on LAN A. And again, once you create RRAS and it's running, assign the IP address, and then come down here and make sure that 192.168.1.1 is on LAN A and 192.168.2.1 is on LAN B. If they're switched, just go back into the settings and change them. Okay, so use this tab, this networking tab. I mean, it starts on summary, but you can click here and it will show you the information there. All right. And then once you get the router done, you'll be testing to verify that you can, we're going to do static IP addresses first. And can you ping from Win10.1 to 10.2? If not, you need to troubleshoot your network setup and client. One of the things you want to do, make sure all the IP addresses are correct, and then turn off the firewalls, because sometimes those firewalls they'll not sometimes, all the time, they'll block ping. So you should be able to get ping from Win10.1 to Win10.2. So from this machine here, you should be able to ping across the router to Win10.2 and then get the reply back. And from 10.2 to 10.1. Okay. And then after that, yeah, once you have copied those disks, what I do is I go back into this. Louis just said, so glad he didn't, that he said it to read only. Go into your Hyper-V manager and right click on Win Server Parent and delete it. It will not delete the information, it'll just delete it from our screen here. So hit delete and then do the same thing with Windows 10. That way they're not on there and you're not going to accidentally run those, because we will never run those VMs again. Once we set them up, sysprepped them, made them read only, we're not going to do anything but use them to spawn off children. Okay, so they're like our little clone material. That's all they're going to be used for is to clone. Okay, and then once we do it statically, I want you to switch it to DHCP. Okay, static IP addressing is fine, but we're going to have, we want to leverage the DHCP server. So set Win10.1 and 10.2 to dynamically, and then tell me what the IP address is. And then tell me if you can ping. And then I want you to tell me why you cannot ping from Win10 to 1 to 10.2 or 10.2 to 10.1. Okay, so evaluate your environment. It's a really simple question with a really simple answer once you see what's going on. And then I tell you how to fix it. So then go into the router and you'll fix it, and then you should be able to ping back and forth. Now I tell you, congratulations, you've just performed some major networking skills that would be very common in today's server environment. So when you're all said and done with this lab, now really there's only a couple of questions. What's your IP address? And can you ping? And then why isn't it? And that's it. Those are the only questions I asked. But at the end of the day, you should be able to ping from Win10.2 to Win10.1 and Win10.1 to Win10.2. Okay, so that's your goal. Now, if you have any questions, just ask me. I'm going to be here until 2:40. And again, I'm going to stop this recording. So I'll stop the share first, and then I'll stop the recording.